Hello, I'm Jim,
And I'm Garrett.
and this is Jim and Garrett at the movies.
I think we got it that time.
I'm Jim.
I think
Hello.
third time was the charm, as it were.
Yeah, it finally sort of worked out that way.
Yeah, yeah.
Uh, and of course, yeah. So welcome everybody to the third episode of Jim and Garrett at the movies. Tonight we'll be talking about Spike Lee's newest joint, BlackKKlansman, and his classic, what I would contend is his best film to date, Do the Right Thing, 1989's Do the Right Thing. And finally, for our news segment, we'll talk about Geoffrey Owens and what happened with him. So, with no further ado, we'll get right into BlackKKlansman. This is the newest Spike Lee film. It stars John David Washington, who's the son of Denzel Washington, frequent Spike Lee collaborator, Adam Driver, Laura Harrier, Alec Baldwin, and Topher Grace. It's a story of an African-American police detective who joins the Colorado Springs Police Department in the 1970s. At this point, he is the first African-American to join this particular police department, and he ends up infiltrating the Ku Klux Klan, who coincidentally are planning a big violent outburst. There's a lot of really interesting issues going on in this film. I'm excited to unpack them, and well, I'll turn it over to you, Garrett. Before I give my thoughts on the film, what did you think?
I thought this was a well-made film, and it was an incredibly difficult story to tell. It wasn't flawlessly told. I think there was obvious parts where it sort of fell down, but it fell down in far fewer parts than I sort of imagined it would. They're trying to juggle so many balls at the same time. They're trying to tell a true story. They're trying to tell a story which is historical, but also has sort of contemporary echoes. They're trying to make it both comedic and dramatic. And on the whole, I think it succeeded on all of these levels, which is not an easy thing to do. So it's a testimony, as pretty much all of Spike Lee's films are, to his incredible talents as a filmmaker, that he's able to draw all these together in a way that is interesting, engaging, funny, dramatic, and compelling. It is a film that I think it's important. It's one that I recommend to people. I am curious about the true story. I kind of want to go back and read the book by Ron Stallworth to see just how well the movie sort of captured the actual historical events, and also just to get a better sense of what the real story was like. But on the whole, I liked it. I thought it was good. It gets a thumbs up from me.
Fantastic. I could tell you a little bit more about I did a little research about this film's true story and about the book. I'll tell you that off camera because there are quite a few spoilers associated with that. So, but our review sections are spoiler free. One of the things that I'll touch on is I think that this film is it's well directed, as you said, well acted, as you said. The story is incredibly compelling, as Spike Lee, in many of his interviews, has been talking. He's talked about how Jordan Peele pitched him the concept of this film with just 6 words: black man infiltrates Ku Klux Klan, and that by itself sold him on the film, and it does well with that concept. One of the things that I thought was interesting about this film, but didn't necessarily bring it down for me, was that the film is essentially polemic. It's not about the 70s. It is about today. But there's 3 direct references to the Trump administration within the action of this film. Those 3 direct references to the Trump administration and to our daily political machinations he sort of hangs a lantern on those things. Likewise,
several indirect allusions.
Go ahead.
3 direct, but also several indirect allusions as well on top of those 3.
Yeah. Well, I was speaking of Yeah, I mean there are indirect allusions, of course, and then there are a lot of I saw a lot of he's sort of stealing actual phrases that Trump has said and then putting them in the mouths of white supremacists. Um, and so, in that sense, I don't know how this film, assuming that 20 years from now we look back upon 2018 and we've survived it. I don't know whether or not we're going to look back on this film and see it as something that's timeless or simply a product of its time. Likewise, as I'm reviewing this film and asking people to whether or not they should take a look at this film, I don't know. We shouldn't be as tribal as we are, and perhaps one's uh, joining to a tribe is the thing that will keep him or her from enjoying or liking this film. Yeah. So what do you think, Garrett?
Well, I think a lot could be said about both the merits and the problems of tribalism. So I'll try not to go down that path and say focus a little bit more on the movie. Sure. But yeah, I mean, obviously, this is a film that will resonate with people of a certain racial political bent more than others. Not to get too far ahead to Do the Right Thing, but clearly race is a recurring theme in Spike Lee's films, and for an understandable reason. He handles this on film better than the vast majority of filmmakers who at least try to talk about it. But at the same time, in that respect, it's that, I think you can just sort of say, well, it's a Spike Lee movie. If you're the kind of person who doesn't like dealing with race in films, doesn't like having that presented to them, you probably aren't going to like Spike Lee in general, and you probably wouldn't go to see this in the first place for that reason. I agree that people should be encouraged to get out of their comfort zones, to see films that challenge them in some ways. And this film didn't exactly challenge me because it more or less sits with my personal sort of political affiliations as is. So I could perhaps take my own advice and maybe go see a film that does challenge me a little bit more on these sorts of topics. But that having been said, even I don't think that I think most people, unless they are particularly stridently political, can still appreciate things about this movie without being overwhelmed by the sort of contemporary political touchstones, which I think only really come to a head at the very end of the film. But up to that point, I think you could probably bracket and set aside any sort of personal umbrage you might have about the politics, assuming you have such umbrage.
Yeah, I think that's a really fair that's a fair response. Yeah, I tried to sort of put myself in the shoes of somebody who wants to go to films without politics as I was watching this, and I didn't know quite how I would react if I were that person. So I guess I was just basically I was more mentioning it as a caution to potential viewers rather than something that would totally pull me out of the film more. And once again, it does fit with my personal political point of view. Skipping, sort of foreshadowing our discussion of Do the Right Thing, I'll say that I think Do the Right Thing is kind of a timeless film, whereas BlackKKlansman, we're watching Do the Right Thing almost 20 years after it was produced, made, and released, and it holds up for me. Whether BlackKKlansman does as well is an open question.
Yeah, no, I think that's fair. Yeah, it's hard to know to have that kind of foresight as to how the film will hold up. But we're not asking whether or not you should see it 20 years from now. We're asking whether you should see it this weekend. And I would say you should. I think there's sort of a paucity of good movies out there, and this one's probably better than most.
I would agree with that. So yeah,
I wanted to bring up with you, I think we mentioned before off camera that there's a bit of a tussle between Boots Riley, director of Sorry to Bother You,
right,
who also had a white voice, black man doing white voice on the phone, sort of thread running through his film, as does BlackKKlansman. But Boots Riley was pretty critical of this film. Can you run down what his beef was?
Sure. Now, I don't have the exact tweet opened up right now, but I can tell you that his basic argument was that, in his view, the police have been aggressive toward the African American community. This is in Riley's view, have been aggressive toward the African American community, and by portraying an African American police officer in a heroic way, and that this the real life Ron Stallworth was actually involved in quite a few stings against the African American community, and was sort of infiltrating Black Power groups. And those, because the real Ron Stallworth was doing things, and because it portrays an African American police officer in a heroic way, there were questions. Riley questioned whether or not this film was, by and large, a net positive for the African American community, and for African American film. My comment on that, like, it's not my place to get in the middle of a conversation about depictions of African American police officers in cinema. It's certainly not my place to get involved there. What I can say is that when I watched the film, I did not have the same reaction as Boots Riley did. That's not downplaying his reaction. As of yet, I don't believe Spike Lee has responded to Boots Riley's challenges about his film. But then again, this is not, it's not a conversation that, I think my job in that conversation is to be silent and let them talk.
Agreed. Yeah, same. I would not presume to be able to speak on behalf of what anything remotely resembling the African American community. Wanting to be an ally and friend, but I can't pretend to be a member of said community, much less the community of African American filmmakers, who obviously are even more sort of select still. I would be very interested in seeing what Spike Lee had to say about that in response, if he ever does respond. What I would add is I think that there's at least an attempt to acknowledge Boots Riley's perspective in the character of Patrice, who makes many similar criticisms, I think, along those lines, and is presented, I think, as a sort of reasonable, fair-minded character, even if it's not necessarily her voice that the film completely gets behind. It seems to me that Spike Lee is at least sensitive and aware of this potential concern. But again, that's by no means meant to delegitimize Boots Riley's perspective or his criticism.
Exactly. I totally agree with that. And I think that, well, the issue, the sort of wrench in there is Patrice, played by Laura Harrier in the film. She's actually a made-up character. So that was made up for the film. That's not too spoilery. I think the film works anyway. So yeah. Overall, Garrett, what would you give this film?
I think on a 5-star scale, I would give this 4 stars. I think, it succeeds in most of the endeavors it sets out to do. It succeeds as a comedy, it succeeds as a crime story, it succeeds as a period piece, and succeeds as a reflection on contemporary America. There are some weaknesses here and there, but they're the kind of weaknesses that, don't significantly detract from the overall quality of the film.
I absolutely agree. I am right along your lines in both star rating and in terms of what you were saying about the film. The only negative, and it's not really a negative, it's sort of just a caution for viewers, is what I talked about vis-a-vis the film's polemic sense. But yeah, I give it a 4-star rating. I thought that it worked on multiple levels. It was dramatic. It touched me, and it made me laugh a few times. And that's what you go to a Spike Lee joint for.
Now, since you've mentioned it really quickly, it's as a segue into our discussion of Do the Right Thing. Do you know why it is he calls his films joints?
I do not. I think that's kind of just his thing. Yeah, but I don't know if there's a specific reason for that. That's an interesting question. I sort of wish I knew more about Spike Lee to to answer that. No, I don't. I don't
It's
know.
somewhat stylistically similar. It reminds me to how Trent Reznor issues all of Nine Inch Nails' official album releases as Halo, Halo 1, Halo 2, Halo 3.
Interesting.
And I've never quite understood why he does that either. But it's definitely a nice little signature there.
Yeah, it's a nice signature, and it's sort of like a joint is a place, is it not? It's not just pot. It's a place, and I think that in many ways you sort of hang out in a Spike Lee world when you watch a Spike Lee movie, and so in that sense, I think it works thematically. But yeah, I'm not totally. Unless there's some hidden thing that I'm not aware of. Yeah, that would be my response to that question. So
homework assignment for our viewers: go Google that and figure out why.
yeah, there you go. Tweet us.
Right. Okay, so how about we move on then to talking about Do the Right Thing?
Let us do it. Yeah, so this is one of my favorite movies of all time, 1989's Do the Right Thing. This is a story of one day in Bed-Stuy, an area in Brooklyn. Note to our viewers that we will be talking spoilers, so I think the one thing that we talk about this film will be the end, which is problematic and has confused many people over time, many critics over time. But this is I think what impresses me most about this film, and as I rewatched it again today, I rewatched it. I'll sort of tell you this bit because I think this is kind of funny. But I rewatched it today, and I finished it at like 1 PM, and I thought to myself, I just rewatched Do the Right Thing, and somehow I'm supposed to do something for the rest of the day, aside from think about just this movie. I love this movie. So one of the things that's really interesting about this film is that it is able to combine a young person's energy with an older person's maturity. I think this is an incredibly mature film at the same time that it's an incredibly energetic film. And you see that in the performances and the cinematography and the music, which is incredibly multi-layered. We've got operatic scores, we've got jazz going on here, we've got traditional movie score, we've got rap, we've got all of the varied characters of this area that span racial and cultural and generational boundaries. We've got strong performances by Danny Aiello, John Turturro, and Spike Lee himself, Rosie Perez's first film, Ozzie Davis, Giancarlo Esposito, Gus Fring himself as Bugging Out was one of my favorite performances. I can go on and on about this film and how much I love it and its Dutch angles. I will, but I'll sort of turn it over to you, Garrett, and say, what did you think about Do the Right Thing?
Well, first thing to parlay off the point that you made, about maturity. I actually had to do a double take to make sure that actually was Spike Lee in the role, because I swear to God, he looked like he was 15 years old. He actually was 30 years old when he made that film. But I was so thrown off by, I recognized him, but I didn't recognize him. And so, yeah, even though, 30 is not necessarily a young age for a filmmaker in terms of the broad scope of things, I do think you're right. It's an incredibly mature and sophisticated film. I saw the film shortly after it was first released. I would have been about 12 years old. I haven't seen it since. So I rewatched it for this review. And one of the things which struck me most is how far my own racial consciousness has developed, because I wouldn't have remembered off the top of my head, but after watching it, I do remember thinking things about the various characters and the various scenes, which in retrospect, it's like, God damn, I realized I was 12, but I was harboring some pretty fucking racist attitudes back then. I mean, kind of makes sense. I was, raised in a largely white suburb. At 12, I did not yet have any African-American friends. I knew really nothing about, the African-American experience. I hadn't read Malcolm X or anything like that at that point. So, again, I think I should be, forgiven for that. But it really was just impressive to me to reflect on how far and how much my own opinions and thoughts on racial politics has changed. In short, I'll give sort of one example. I thought that, Danny Aiello, when I first watched watched it was sort of the unambiguous victim, that he was being tormented and terrorized, and being treated entirely unfairly. And watching it in retrospect a second time, it's like, well, he is a victim, but there's much more to him than that. He has, I wouldn't say necessarily a share of responsibility about what happens to him at the end, but he definitely isn't just sort of passive. He's a participant, and is a stand-in, I think, in many ways, not necessarily perhaps for Italian Americans in Brooklyn. Again, I having not grown up there or lived there, I don't want to speak too much to what that dimension is like, but certainly to white America, about how even they might be nominally on board with racial equality and so forth, still have these sort of sticking, lingering biases, short-sightedness, which can cause real harm to African Americans or other groups that might be disempowered in relation to them. And so that was, I mean, again, I wouldn't say it was an eye-opener for the issues for me today, because I'm much more conscious about it today, but it was an eye-opener for me to see how far I was able to come over the last almost 30 years now at this point, since I watched it the first time.
Yeah, I think that this was, I saw this shortly after it first came out as well, and I'm with you on that. There's a lot about this that I think that this film, it's not so much that it raised I think that this was an early raising of my racial consciousness, if I can be said to have such a thing. I hope I can. So yeah, I think that this film worked as an early way for me to be introduced to the African American experience and how the African American experience differs so much from my own. And that's a powerful thing that film was capable of doing. I never thought that Danny Aiello was exactly the victim of circumstance, but I did think that he was more than just a stand-in for white institutional power. There was more to his character than that. That he wasn't just white institutional power, and he wasn't just the unwilling victim. And I think that one of the things that, when I speak about the maturity of this film, I'm speaking about the dialogic nature of the film. Spike Lee, as a very young filmmaker, is able to get into the voices and the heads of so many different characters with experiences and experiences and paradigms that are dramatically different from his own, and all of them feel true and real, and each of them is struggling in a new and separate way. And I find that to be remarkably mature and remarkably interesting. So that, yeah, I love Danny Aiello's character. I love Spike Lee's character. I love everybody in this film except for, of course, John Turturro, who's a complete fucking dickhead.
Yeah, I mean, in that respect, yeah, he's clearly the sort of the most vocally racist character. At the same time, I think it's worth noting it was a good performance by Turturro's part.
True.
He was written to be an asshole, and he lived up to the expectation on the page. But yeah, I mean, it was impressive. Just like, yeah, the cast overall, I think, was excellent. And again, if I did have any criticism, and again, people who listen to my analyses over on the Deadly Analysis will know this is a regular come back to me. It's sort of from a feminist perspective. I think that the female characters are a little bit weaker than the male characters. They get significantly less screen time, significantly less attention, significantly less development as characters.
True.
Rosie Perez's character probably gets the most screen time, and she sort of comes across as a nag and a lot of the time, and plays into a lot of sort of Puerto Rican stereotypes, which, I mean, again, I don't want to speak for the Puerto Rican community or tell them how they should feel about how they're represented in this movie, but I can imagine that maybe some people might not appreciate them being presented on camera in that way. Now, again, I don't think that's a major drawback to the film, so much as it's a potential, again, something I would be interested in hearing about from people with different perspectives than mine, if that detracts from their enjoyment of the film at all. But sort of trying to be aware of different perspectives and lenses through which you can view a film. And well, I do want to be race conscious. I also want to be gender conscious too. So
True. Yeah, I think that's fair. Yeah, sort of switching gears a little bit. What did you think of the ending?
Yeah, I mean, the ending is what I remembered most. In fact, it was the only part of the film I clearly remembered, and I remembered it being very heartbreaking and sad. And I mean, and again, speaking to my earlier point, I remember thinking, the character of Radio Raheem is killed. I remember thinking it was his damn fault. That was,
Oh, wow.
Yeah, exactly. Right.
Oh,
Now I look back and that's like, holy shit, that's,
wow. Okay.
it's a terrible thought that I had, but I want to own it because I want to, to highlight it, because I think that a lot of people, adults might view it and see that the same way. He was aggressive towards Danny Aiello. He came in with the boombox. He refused to, listen to what was, to my mind, a reasonable request. If he had just been more polite, more considerate, the cops wouldn't have been called and he wouldn't have been put in trouble. Yeah, today I absolutely disavow that perspective.
Sure.
I mean, again, I understand better now, again, that the tense relationship between police officers and the African-American community. I have, again, a better grasp, certainly not a complete grasp, but a better grasp on the frustrations and the anger that they feel being disempowered in their own spaces and in their own neighborhoods, and how they cannot be safe. So all of that leads me to appreciate the sort of almost Shakespearean tragedy of the end of that of the film a lot better. A sort of a side note on this point, one of the things I thought was really interesting viewing it today was that unlike a lot of films dealing with race, especially films that came out around the same time, like Boys in the Hood or Menace to Society or something like that, there's no gangs in this film. There's no guns. There's no drugs. It's just Black people living their lives, right, and running into conflict and tension for it. And that to me is really, really fascinating. And, again, it doesn't, I don't think it's sort of whitewashing, so to speak, those elements of the Black experience or urban life away, but it is sort of presenting, a very real side that, the problems that the Black community encounters with the police doesn't necessarily have to do with gangs or violence or guns in any overt way. It really is just sort of an inherent racial dimension to that relationship that causes strife, and in the instance of this film, leads to a disaster at the end.
Yeah. I think one of the things I noticed about Radio Raheem's character this time watching it this time was that Public Enemy and his radio is his voice. Mm-hmm. It's his way of expressing himself. It's his way of being in the world. And to ask him to turn his music down is to ask him to stop being him. And that's why it's such a monumental conflict for him as a character. And I think that's not something that I would, well, first of all, I saw it when I was like 10 or 11. So there's that. But that's something that I got this time, and I thought was an important element to understanding the conflict that happens. And yeah, I think, but the one question, when I ask you about the end, the one question is, why does Mookie throw the trash can through the window?
Right, and that actually is something that still conflicted with me, because I mean, what I took that to be was him sort of deciding who he stands with. The whole movie, he kind of has a foot in both worlds. He obviously cares for Sal, and he's working for them, but at the same time, he understands that he's not equal to them, both because he's not a member of the family and because he's not white. So there's a sort of a conflict in him, and I think that's when he makes the decision that no, he's going to stand with his community. One of the things which still sort of I'm conflicted over is that at the end he has the gall, after doing that, to go and ask for his money, and then Saul gives it to him. And now again, for Saul, it's sort of a matter of pride, I suppose. But I don't know. I mean, it seems to me that if you're going to decide to stand with the African-American community, then you don't go back to the master and then ask for your payday, right? That seemed to me to be, again, I'm not saying it was the wrong decision, but that made it more complicated for me that he made that decision the next morning.
That's yeah. I think there's a sense of honor that needs to that he feels needs to be upheld, and he is owed $250. He's gonna get $250 because $250, like that's the agreement that was reached between them, and that sense of honor seems to connect the two. And there's a great scene at the end where Sal throws $500 at him. Says, now you're a rich fucking man. You got $500. You're a rich fucking man. And Mookie throws $200 bills back at him and says, I owe you $50. And that sense of honor and equity, I think, is what allows them to have a relatively friendly exchange. I mean, there's still it's still tense, but there's a relative friendliness to their exchange immediately after that I think was highlight, but was born of the fact that Spike Lee said, I'll owe you $50 and threw the other two back. One thing I'll say about the Mookie throwing the trash can through the window is there have been other theories about this as well, some that are more plausible than others. One theory says that Mookie throws the trash can through the window because he realizes that the group of African Americans who are gathered there would probably inflict their rage upon Sal, and in order to quote unquote save his friend, he makes the target Sal's pizzeria, not Sal's person. I'm not totally convinced by that, but that's a theory that I've heard elsewhere attributed to Spike Lee, yet I haven't been able to find Spike Lee saying that.
Yeah, I think that's a generous interpretation. If that is what the film intended, I think the film fails to deliver that. There are ways in which you could have made that more clear. It would have involved, I think, shots of Mookie, processing, showing him being afraid for Sal or something like that. And you don't see any of that on the screen. You see him, stressed out, anxiety ridden, and to me, it's sort of like an existentialist choice at that moment. This is who I am. This is who I'm going to be. I'm sticking with my community, and shit's going down.
And he also saw. Let's not forget that he just saw his friend get killed.
Right. Yeah.
That is, I don't think we can downplay the effect that has upon him, and I think that's remarkably important as well.
Agreed. Yeah. And again,
another quick side note about this. I'm sorry to interrupt you. Another quick side note about this was I read that Spike Lee has been quoted as saying that no African American has ever asked him why Mookie throws the trash can through the window. It's only white people who ask him why Mookie threw the trash can. Well, and so as two white people talking about this, we've got to talk about why Mookie threw the trash can through the window.
For the record, that wasn't a question I even bothered to ask myself. I thought it was pretty clear, but again, whether or not my pretty clear read is what Spike Lee wanted me to take away from it is a different question.
Yeah, and but I also think that there's an interesting, like, you titled the film "Do the Right Thing," and then you have a character do a thing that is definitely morally ambiguous. We're gonna have to ask that question, right. I think.
Well, the title of the film comes from a line by Malcolm X, and right. The film closes with juxtaposed quotes between Martin Luther King and Malcolm X on the use of violence to fight injustice, racial injustice, and I think that I myself have in recent years sort of come to somewhat resent the kind of, I think, the false dichotomy between King and Malcolm over the role of violence in dealing with injustice. I think that that's
short-sighted.
Yeah, exactly. They're a lot more on the same page than they're often presented as being. But that sort of reservation notwithstanding, I do think it creates, the film does do a really good job of presenting that as a challenge at the end about, sort of looking at these two perspectives, two, similar but different perspectives on the African-American experience and the difficulty of reconciling violence versus peaceful protest. And how to handle that. Quick plug, by the way, for my this wasn't a coincidence that I'm wearing this today. If anyone's keyed into that politics, but that's a conversation for another time. So yeah, those are my closing thoughts.
Oh, Nike. Oh, I see what you're saying now. Okay. Yeah, I got it.
Colin Kaepernick.
I was sitting there going like, what the hell are you talking about with what you're wearing? You're just wearing a black shirt. I don't understand.
Yeah.
I got it.
So maybe we should segue on to our new segment.
Let us do it. We are talking about Geoffrey Owens. Now, if you're not aware, Geoffrey Owens is currently working as at Trader Joe's in New Jersey. A customer of Trader Joe's, a medical secretary, spotted him, recognized him, took some surreptitious photos.
Recognized him as what? I think maybe in case our viewers don't know.
What's that?
Our viewers might not know who he is.
Right. Geoffrey Owens. I'm sorry. Geoffrey Owens played a sort of bit part. His character name was Alvin in the Cosby Show. Alvin in the Cosby Show. He was the suitor to one of Cosby's daughters, Sandra Huxtable's daughter. Eventually became her husband during the course of that show. So a customer at Trader Joe's took some surreptitious pictures of him and then sent them to the Daily Mail. And the Daily Mail wrote an article which, well, I'll read a little bit. I'll read what's included in the article. The medical secretary from Clifton said, I was just in Trader Joe's and I said to my wife, I said, wait a minute, that's a guy from the Cosby Show. She looked at him and said, it looks like him. He's a little heavier. I pulled up a site on the internet, took a picture of him and said, that is him. Later on in the article, it goes on to say, Owens went on, check that. I used to watch the Cosby Show all the time. It was my favorite show. It was definitely him. I would have thought after the Cosby Show, he would maybe be doing something different. It was a shock to see him working there and looking the way he did. So that was the article printed in the Daily Mail. Fox News picked up that article. There's some text that is actually removed from the Fox News article and it's rephrased. Some of the direct shaming of Owens is removed from the Fox News article, but nevertheless, Fox News got a lot of the ire from Twitter that basically shamed Fox News for quote unquote shaming Geoffrey Owens. Trending hashtags as a result of this was hashtag actors with day jobs, and the SAG-AFTRA Foundation, which is the union that most screen actors and, well, professional screen actors belong to, they tweeted out their support for Geoffrey Owens. This is a direct tweet from the SAG-AFTRA Foundation Twitter account. This hashtag Labor Day, we honor Geoffrey Owens and all the hardworking actors who work 1, 2, 3 day jobs in order to pay the bills, take care of their families, and work to entertain us. Hashtag actors with day jobs. Share yours loud and proud. And as a result, several actors, including Terry Crews, tweeted out their other jobs that they have had in between acting jobs. One of the interesting think pieces came in the New Yorker. This is by Michael Schulman. He writes, by undervaluing the labor of creative professions, we put artists in a double bind. The artistic work isn't seen as work, but it's also assumed to be so lucrative that any non-acting job they might pursue is suspect. And one of the things that's interesting about this story, look, this should actually be a non-story. You saw somebody working at Trader Joe's who you think you recognize. The end. That should be the long and short of this story. And yet, it was picked up in a rather exploitive way by the Daily Mail. I think the Daily Mail is an off-opined publication. This is just one more reason why it should be opined. Likewise, Fox News, which, to be fair, tempered their story a little bit, also gets guilty of shaming this actor in a petty and cruel way. What is interesting to me about this is what Schulman writes about how we've got this sort of double standard about how we view creative professionals. They're all artistic elites in our cultural imagination, and the real life day-to-day work of being a creative professional in this industry is it's a tough job, and it's actors' paychecks are spotty, they're sporadic, and the number of actors who've tweeted out their support only exemplifies how true that is. And what do you think about this, Garrett? Any thoughts about the quote unquote shaming of Geoffrey Owens?
Yeah, well, I think the obvious thing, which is fuck anyone who's going to laugh at another person's position like that. There is, I think, a sort of Schadenfreudic aspect of a lot of people's psychology, where anyone who's in a position of greater power than them, whether it be political or fame or financial, when you see them taken down a peg, it makes you feel good, just because there's a sort of resentment of people who are up on the higher ladder. And if you are a person who's not a famous actor, not on television, and you see that happen to an actor on television, it might trigger that. It's human, it's understandable, but I think this kind of thing, if it serves any good function at all, it can shine a light on that sort of that Schadenfreude impulse, and hopefully be a learning opportunity to recognize that that's not healthy, that it's not good, that it not only tars working class people in a way that's unfair and cruel. It also, it sort of is a failure to recognize, again, everything you say about the creative professions, about actors, about their inconsistent paychecks and so forth, and frankly about how difficult it can be to just be a working actor, even a successful one, even one who's making consistent money. It comes with considerable trade-offs and considerable hardship. And it's not for nothing that a lot of people give up that line of work, not because they didn't have the talent, but because they just didn't want to deal with the bullshit. Now, I don't know why Geoffrey Owens anymore, but it wouldn't surprise me in the least if he is happier now than he was when he was on television. Again, I'm not presuming, but that wouldn't surprise me at all.
Real quick, to Geoffrey Owens is currently he's got IMDb credits in production IMDb credits. He is still, to some degree, a working actor. He's got an entry in IMDb for every year since The Cosby Show. So I think this has more to do with perceptions of what actors get paid than it does to do. Like, Geoffrey Owens is still technically a working actor. He hasn't given up his career. He needs, because the paycheck sucks so badly, to get a second job in order to make ends meet. I mean, I'm talking to you as a failed actor, as somebody who had to work 2-3 jobs and who didn't make it in the industry, and now had to eventually get my education and be a teacher for a living instead of an actor. It was too difficult. Money was really tight living in New York, and I think if any good can come out of this story, it can come out of our recognition that empathy needs to go across all professions. To, as Schulman writes at the end of his New Yorker article, perhaps it's time to stop differentiating what kind of work we think is real and start valuing hard work in whatever form it comes. That's a really poignant phrase for me, especially coming from not making it in the industry. And that's yeah. So it was really tough to watch this story unfold. But at the same time, hopefully we can I think the backlash to the story has heartened me slightly. So there's that.
That it was
on Labor Day. On
Right.
Labor Day, it's the time to recognize the shit. So go ahead. I'm sorry I interrupted you.
No, that is a really good closing line for the article, and I thank you for correcting me. I obviously did not research the backstory, in part because I was put off by the shaming in the first place. I didn't really want to look into it for fear of driving clicks and likes and so forth. But I am glad for him that he's finding work in his chosen profession. And yeah, again, I hope he's happy in either or both of his career paths. And it should be respected. I think I'll close this segment for on my side with a paraphrase of a quote from Robert Pirsig, who is an author who was very influential for me, who once said of celebrity that the way people who are not celebrities relate to celebrities is that they love them for being who they want to be, but they hate them for being who they're not. And I think that was a pretty insightful comment.
That is good. Yeah. Well, I think that's a good quote to end the show on. Great, Garrett. What do you think?
That sounds like a good way to wrap it up. We're at 45 minutes. We can call it there.
Sounds great. All right. Once again, this is. Oh wait, let's tease the next. I forgot about the next episode. Yeah. The next episode. What do we have? What's our movie club? Our movie club is Charlie Chaplin's Modern Times. Yes, we cover shit before we were born. And our review segment, we will both be seeing and reviewing. I've actually already seen it. Spoiler alert, I love it. Searching. We will be talking about Searching next week, along with Modern Times. All right, this is Jim.
And I'm Garrett.
And this has been
Jim and Garrett.
The movies.
Okay. Thanks, everyone. Bye.